The fake out ending. In a lot of games, you can see it coming, and a lot you can't. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 10 times we thought the game was over, but it wasn't. Starting off at number 10, way back in the day, Super Nintendo's Donkey Kong Country. Now the way this game seemingly ends is you get to the final boss, you bop him a few times, and that's it, he's done, he's defeated. The screen goes dark, and the credits start playing. But, it doesn't take very long to figure out there's something a little bit wrong with the credits. It's fairly obvious they're fake, but take your mind back to 1994. If you were into video games at that point, you were probably a kid, and that was probably mind-bending to you. It was to me anyway. Like, the credits just show enemy names instead of any actual programmers, which is obviously a huge tip-off, but if you remember NES game credits like Castlevania, they all used fake names at the time, partially to avoid programmers getting poached by other companies. So even though the practice was long over by the time DKC came out, if you were a Nintendo kid at the time, it could, in theory, fool you. That, and a lot of the time, we're just used to credits being the end of something, at least back then. Obviously, there's always a scene after the credits now. Thanks, Marvel. So of course the credits get to a "the end?" ? And K. Rool comes back to life for round 2, and he puts up way more of a fight this time. It's kind of the classic, basic, fake-out ending, and it really only adds a couple of minutes, but still, I had no idea when it happened. And at number 9 is Shenmue 2. This is a weird one. Like, Shenmue games are known for their unusual pacing. And the ending section of Shenmue 2 really is kind of the prime example, the real shining beacon of the unusual pacing in this game. It's kind of crazy when you think about it, which basically sums up the entire series. So, in Shenmue 2, you're trying to find this dude named Yuan Zhu for the entire game. That's just what you do in Shenmue games. You wander around and ask people about sailors or Yuan Zhu. That's just what happens.
I'm sorry, I'm busy right now.
Near the end of the game, you find is being held by the Yellow Head Gang at their headquarters, basically the bad guys you've been dealing with the entire game. So you attack their base, which is a huge abandoned skyscraper, which feels like the epic conclusion to the game's story, only you beat the Yellowhead leader, Don Noi, you rescue Yuan Zhu, and you see Lan Di, the man who killed your father, which seems like a setup for the next game, The Sun Sets, the Music Swells game over, right? Nope. Now the game goes on for another 3 hours, where you wander around the woods on a trail to Bailu Village, which is where Shenmue 3 takes place. And I just want to emphasize that nothing happens at all in this section of the game. You talk to people and you walk forward on the trail. That is it. When you finally get to Bailu Village, it's a short scene just before the game finally and abruptly ends. No final battle, no other surprises, just nothing. It's actually one of the strangest ending sequences in gaming history, and given it wasn't resolved for many years, all we really had to concentrate on was this strangeness.
Can I ask you something?
I don't know.
I understand.
And at number 8, Metal Gear Solid 5, end of part 1. So you're 30 hours into the game, you find Metal Gear, you kill Skullface, the end credits roll, and then, end of part 1. End of part 1. So you killed the bad guy, recovered his fancy Metal Gear, but the game just keeps going as you see Mother Base become increasingly paranoid after the end of part 1. Part 1. This section of the game climaxes in this bizarre sequence where Snake is forced to gun down his own men, who are apparently zombies now. They're infected with something. The Metal Gear you got, it's stolen, and then everything basically goes to hell. Then the game ends. Or rather, stops. I don't know if it's actually the end of the game. There was a planned Act 3 that would have connected all the random story bits together, but it was cut after it was pretty obvious that Konami was getting out of the games business and just wanted to ship the game and be done with it. The fact that the game went on past the traditional ending point was mind-blowing, but also incredibly baffling. At number 7 is Okami. Clover Games, now known as Platinum Games, of course, have never really been afraid of doing weird stuff, right? That's the understatement of the year. I don't have to explain to you that Platinum Games is constantly letting their freak flag fly. Also, Okami is unusual in more ways than one, of course. The game keeps going well beyond where you think it'll end, not once, but twice. First, when you defeat Orochi, the dragon that the entire story of the game seems to be building up as the final boss, and then again when you go to Oni Island to defeat Ninetales. It's not until you beat up Yami, literally the devil in Japanese mythology, before the game actually ends. The game never even implies that there will be more after defeating Orochi, so the fact that it just kept going on after that part is surprising enough, but then it does the same thing twice. And it really throws you, it's like, oh, there's still more game. What are you talking about? I mean, I obviously don't mind, it's an amazing game, but it really throws you for a loop. At number 6 is Perfect Dark. Perfect Dark was already a pretty strange game compared to GoldenEye 64. Yes, they share a lot of gameplay mechanics because they are more or less iterations of the same mechanics. But Perfect Dark focuses on conspiracies and alien plots, and just when it seems like the game is about to end, things get really out of control. Mission 6 seems like the end of the game, when you sneak onto a sunken alien ship and disable its super weapon, which saves the world obviously. Super weapons usually not good for the world. But afterwards, a cutscene plays that seems to wrap up everything. That said, it's a fake out. The Institute is under attack by these bug aliens, and you end up getting captured by them. Then you break out of alien jail, take over the ship, and then fly to the home world and kill the alien leader. Like, it's really an escalation from the start of Mission 1 where you infiltrate an office building.
It makes no sense.
At number 5 is Dragon's Dogma. And your main goal in Dragon's Dogma is to kill the dragon, obviously. There's going to be a large focus on dragons in any game that has dragon in the title. You see, the dragon kills the guy you play as in the prologue and has been a constant looming threat throughout the entire game. So obviously the game ends when you kill the dragon, right? Nope. In a completely unforeshadowed twist, there is a ton of game left after there is no dragon left. The Duke, who had previously been your ally, attacks you, and a huge section of the main city of the game collapses into a bottomless pit. You end up falling into the pit, of course, which sends you to somewhere where you have to find these definitely not Dungeons and Dragons beholders before facing this guy, the Seneschal, who is basically the god of this world. Whee! What a ride! Like, the most bizarre thing is if you beat him, you replace him as god of that world, and if you lose, you get turned into a dragon. Suffice to say, this game goes absolutely bonkers after you beat the dragon, and it's more than a little surprising. At number 4, Dark Souls 2. In From Software games, especially the ones leading up to Dark Souls 2, the identity of the last boss was usually a king. The False King from Demon Souls and Lord Gwyn from Dark Souls. Generally, you're fighting the king of whatever land you're in for each game. Dark Souls 2 obviously doesn't do that. It's different. The entire game is spent trying to access the Drangelic Castle, and all you ever hear about is its king, Vendrick, who apparently attempted to master the mysteries of the soul. Yeah, you know, all the soul talk you hear about in Dark Souls games. Let's talk about souls, baby. I mean, that sure sounds like the last boss to me, but when you get to the throne room of the Drangelic Castle, it's empty. Exploring further brings you to the Undead Crypt, which could possibly be the final area, considering how much these games talk about the undead. But when you find Vendrick's tube, that's when the surprise happens. Vendrick isn't the last boss, he's just a mindless zombie who wanders around the room muttering to himself. He doesn't even attack you, you can just walk away if you want. There's actually a lot more game after that, and a lot more weird stuff for you to deal with if you want to fight the real final boss, but finding Vendrick is probably one of the most interesting non-climaxes in the entire Dark Souls series. At number 3 is Nier Automata. The original Nier was famously a game with a lot of endings, and Nier Automata takes the crazy ending stuff introduced in that game to a whole new place. How it works is that you play through the game once normally, and that gets you the first ending. This unlocks New Game Plus, which in most games lets you start with everything you got in the previous run through, but doesn't actually affect the ending. Here, however, it completely changes your perspective on the story, where you see things as 9S instead of 2B. It's interesting because the events of the story actually play out a little bit differently, but after getting ending B, that's when stuff really starts to get crazy. The second half of the game is after this. You've beaten the game twice, and you have played half of the game. The fact that they hid such a large section of the game behind having to play through what you thought was the entire game twice is nuts. It's totally shocking when you realize that, oh, the game isn't done. All this crazy stuff is going down now, and hey, there's another playable character. I mean, this is a game where you thought it was over twice, and I mean you thought it was over twice. You literally think that it is over. Third time through, when everything changes and you beat it again, it feels like it cannot possibly go on anymore, and yet it's not done. At number 2 is Final Fantasy games. Let's just say Final Fantasy games love the fake out ending. In Final Fantasy 1, you defeat Garland and save the princess, but whoops, the game isn't over, now you have to fight the elementals. In Final Fantasy 2, you defeat the evil emperor, but whoa, no, the Dark Knight Leon has taken over, and now the emperor comes back as the demon emperor, and yeah, that game's nuts. In Final Fantasy 5, you beat X-Death, but he was disguised as a thorn, and then he destroys a huge chunk of the world, and you have to follow him to the third and final world map. Final Fantasy VI probably being the most famous example of this, with the floating continent really looking like the final dungeon before Kefka does his thing and destroys the world, leading into the second part of the game, the World of Ruin. Honestly, that whole section of the game is like morale killing too, because you literally have to round everybody up again. Oh hey, remember when we tried to stop everything from happening, but it did anyway? Let's go try to stop it again. And finally, at number 1, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. This is probably the most famous, possibly the best, secret to uncover that unlocks essentially another half of game. Normally, you reach the castle and fight the boss of the game, Richter Belmont. Obviously, something is up, however, because it's a Castlevania game. You gotta fight Dracula. So if you explore and uncover the deepest parts of the castle, you'll find Richter actually being controlled by Shaft, who wants to resurrect Dracula. You break the illusion and free Richter to find out there is an entire second castle. The Inverted Castle, upside down but filled with entirely new enemies and bosses. If you want to fight Dracula and get the true ending of this game, you have to fully explore this castle as well. It is just a completely shocking twist, and one that a lot of people missed, because if you remember, when this game came out, everybody had dial-up. Internet access was not as easy as it is today. And I've got one bonus for you too, the ending of Control. We've mentioned it in other videos, but it deserves a mention here. You get what looks like the end. A bizarre cutscene plays, and then you get the credits. This is a weird enough game that it's actually believable the game would end here. But after a while the credits start to distort, and you get dropped into a dream sequence where you're an office assistant. The game continues from there, but it's a really weird freak out. What are some fake out endings you remember? Are these any of your most fond? Leave us a comment, let us know what you think. If you like this video, please click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. The best way to see them first is of course a subscription. So click subscribe and don't forget to enable all notifications. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.